After the invitation, living faithfully in ordinary days. There's a moment that often comes after something meaningful has ended. The reflection has happened, the conversation has been had, the intention has been set, and then life resumes. The alarm goes off, coffee brews, the calendar fills back up, the world doesn't feel especially profound, it just feels normal. I've learned that this moment can feel surprisingly disorienting. We tend to think growth happens in the big moments, the insights, the turning points, the declarations of, this is the year I do things differently. Those moments matter, of course. They create awareness. They soften us. They invite us to pause and consider how we want to live. But what often goes unexamined is what happens after the moment passes. What happens when the glow wears off? What happens when clarity fades into routine? What happens when nothing feels especially inspired, but life keeps moving? That's where most of life actually happens. I've noticed this pattern in myself over and over again. After a season of reflection or rest, I often feel ready, steady, grounded, clear. And then a few days later, I catch myself wondering why that clarity feels harder to access. Nothing is wrong. Life is just ordinary again. And if I'm honest, there have been times when that ordinariness felt like a letdown. We don't often talk about how uncomfortable normal can feel after something meaningful. There's a quiet temptation to chase the feeling we had instead of learning how to live from it, to recreate the moment instead of practicing what it revealed. What I've come to understand, both in wellness and in faith, is that growth is rarely sustained by intensity. It's sustained by faithfulness. And faithfulness almost always looks quieter than what we expect. In wellness culture, we talk a lot about momentum, motivation, resets, fresh starts. We talk about routines like they should feel exciting and energizing all the time. But very little attention is given to what happens when motivation fades and routine becomes repetitive. Yes, this is the space where habits either take root or fall away. This is where wellness stops being a project and starts becoming a way of living. And the same is true spiritually. Faith isn't built only in moments of insight or inspiration. It's built in the returning, in the choosing again, and the showing up when nothing feels dramatic or particularly meaningful. The days when you don't feel especially strong or especially focused, those days matter more than we think. I remember a season when everything felt aligned. I was eating well, sleeping better, moving my body consistently, and creating quiet space in my mornings. It all felt intentional. And then life got busy again. My dad's stroke, a packed schedule, building a business, a few late nights, meals that became more about convenience than nourishment. I didn't abandon what I valued, but I noticed how quickly I started telling myself I'd get back to it later. That's often how drifting happens, not through rebellion, but through postponement. What pulled me back wasn't guilt or pressure. It wasn't a dramatic reset or a harsh realization. It was the quiet awareness that faith and wellness aren't things you return to someday. They're things you practice today, even imperfectly, and especially when life feels full. There's something deeply grounding about letting go of the idea that growth should always feel like progress. Sometimes growth feels like maintenance. Sometimes it feels like recommitment. Sometimes it feels like choosing what you already know again and again. This is where rhythm becomes more important than resolution. Our bodies respond to rhythm. Our nervous systems regulate through consistency. Sleep, nourishment, movement, rest, all of these rely on repetition, not novelty. The body doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for predictability. It wants to know it will be cared for again tomorrow. And our hearts are not so different. When life feels ordinary, then temptation is to disengage or wait for something to change. But what if ordinary days aren't a problem to solve? What if they're the very environment where formation happens? I've noticed when I stop waiting for motivation and start honoring rhythm, everything softens. I don't need to feel inspired to go to bed on time. I don't need a surge of energy to choose nourishing food. I don't need a spiritual high to practice faithfulness. I just need to return. There's a quiet freedom in that. When I stopped expecting growth to feel obvious, I began noticing how much of my life was already shaped by the smallest, most uncelebrated choices. The moments no one sees, the decisions that don't feel productive or impressive, the days that don't stand out when you look back on them, but somehow leave you steadier than before. We live in a culture that loves evidence, proof, metrics. We want to know something is working. We want reassurance that our efforts are paying off. And yet so much of meaningful formation resists measurement. You don't always feel calmer while your nervous system is learning safety. You don't always feel faithful while you're practicing trust. You don't always feel well while your body is rebuilding strength. This can be unsettling if we're used to evaluating growth by how it feels in the moment. I've had seasons where I was doing all the right things, sleeping more consistently, eating in a way that supported my energy, creating space for quiet, and yet emotionally, I felt flat, not bad, not inspired, just neutral. And my instinct was to assume something was wrong, to wonder if I needed to change something, add something, push harder. But what if that neutrality wasn't stagnation? What if it was stability? We don't talk enough about how unfamiliar steadiness can feel when we're used to intensity. When life has been chaotic or emotionally charged, calm can feel boring, even uncomfortable. Our systems are used to responding to urgency, not peace. This is where both faith and wellness invite us to relearn what enough feels like. Faithfulness in ordinary days doesn't always bring emotional highs. Sometimes it brings quiet confidence. Sometimes it brings contentment without excitement. Sometimes it brings the absence of drama, which can feel strangely empty if we've grown accustomed to living on the edge. But there's wisdom in that absence. I've noticed that when my days are rooted in simple rhythms, waking, eating, moving, resting, returning, my mind has more space. My body feels less reactive. My spirit feels less pulled in 100 different directions. There's less to prove and more to inhabit. And yet this kind of life rarely announces itself. It doesn't come with milestones or applause. It comes with repetition, with humility, with a willingness to stay present even when nothing feels especially meaningful. This is where so many people quietly step away, not because they don't care, but because the work feels invisible. But invisibility doesn't mean insignificance. Think about how the body heals. You don't feel your immune system strengthening in real time. You don't notice your muscles repairing while you sleep. You don't sense your nervous system recalibrating as you breathe deeply or rest. And yet all of it is happening beneath the surface. Faith works the same way. Formation happens while you live your life, not when you pause it. It happens while you make dinner, while you commute, while you choose to rest instead of scroll, while you return to practices that don't feel exciting anymore, but still feel true. I think this is why ordinary faithfulness feels so countercultural. It asks us to trust without immediate feedback, to remain committed without constant reassurance, to believe that staying matters even when nothing seems to change. And that kind of trust doesn't come naturally. It has to be practiced. I've learned that when I resist the urge to optimize every season, I'm able to settle more fully into that one I'm in. Not every moment needs to be maximized. Not every week needs a takeaway. Some weeks simply need presence. This has been especially important for me during times when life feels full, but not dramatic. when there's no crisis demanding attention, when things are relatively fine. That's often when I'm tempted to disengage or distract, to look for something new instead of staying grounded in what already supports me. But those are the moments when staying matters most, because it's easy to be faithful when life is intense. It's harder and often more formative to be faithful when life is quiet. Quiet reveals what actually sustains us. It shows us whether our practices are rooted in conviction or convenience, whether our rhythms are supportive or performative, whether our faith is something we return to only when needed or something we live from daily. And this doesn't mean doing more. It often means doing less, but doing it consistently. Less noise, less urgency, less striving, more returning, more listening, more presence. This is where wellness stops being about control and starts being about care. Care for your body, even when it feels fine. Care for your mind, even when it isn't loud. Care for your spirit, even when it isn't aching. Because care practiced only in crisis is not care, it's response. And faithfulness practiced only when it feels meaningful is not faithfulness, it's conditional. Ordinary days give us the opportunity to practice something deeper. Steady trust. Trust that nourishment matters even when you're not depleted. Trust that rest matters even when you're not exhausted. Trust that presence matters even when nothing is demanding it. This is where faith and wellness converge most clearly, not in the moments of urgency, but in the long obedience of daily care. If you're listening today and thinking nothing feels wrong, but nothing feels special either, I want to gently say that may be exactly the point. You are allowed to live a life that isn't constantly proving something. You are allowed to let growth be slow. You are allowed to trust that what you're practicing quietly is shaping you deeply. So instead of asking yourself what you need to change right now, try asking what you need to keep. What practice supports you even when life feels full? What rhythm grounds you when motivation fades? What choice helps you to return to yourself when nothing feels urgent? Those answers are often simple, and that simplicity is not weakness, it's wisdom. Ordinary days are not empty, they are spacious, and in that space, formation happens. There's also something important to acknowledge about ordinary days. They don't just feel quiet. Sometimes they feel heavy, not in an obvious way, but in a subtle one. The kind of heaviness that comes from repetition without reward, from doing the same faithful things again without seeing immediate results, from showing up without applause or affirmation. I think many of us quietly wonder, does this really matter? We ask it when we choose rest instead of pushing through. We ask it when we nourish our bodies without seeing dramatic change. We ask it when faith feels steady but not emotional. And if we're honest, we sometimes mistake the absence of intensity for the absence of purpose. But purpose isn't always loud. Some of the most meaningful shifts in our lives happen slowly under the surface while we're living busy lives, while we're folding laundry, while we're walking the same route we always walk, while we're preparing meals that don't feel special but keep us steady. This is the kind of life that doesn't photograph well. It doesn't translate easily into sound bites or summaries, and yet it's the kind of life that forms resilience. I've learned that the temptation in ordinary seasons is to disengage emotionally, to go through the motions while waiting for something more meaningful to arrive. But presence is what turns routine into formation. Attention is what transforms repetition into rhythm. When I bring awareness to my days, even in small ways, they begin to feel less empty. Eating becomes nourishment instead of obligation. Rest becomes care instead of collapse. Faith becomes grounding instead of effort. This doesn't require adding more. It requires noticing more. It requires choosing to inhabit the life you already have instead of waiting for a different one to begin. There's a quiet courage in that, because staying present when nothing feels dramatic asks more of us than chasing moments that feel significant. It asks us to trust that the slow work matters, that what we're practicing now is shaping who we're becoming later. I've noticed that when I stop trying to make ordinary days feel extraordinary, I'm able to receive them more fully. I don't need them to prove anything. I don't need them to carry meaning beyond what they already hold. They hold enough. They hold opportunities for care, for faithfulness, for rest, for returning again to what sustains me. And perhaps most importantly, they hold permission. Permission to live a life that isn't constantly striving for improvement. Permission to let wellness be supportive instead of performative. Permission to let faith be steady instead of spectacular. Ordinary days teach us that consistency is a form of trust, that returning is a form of commitment, that showing up again is its own quiet act of courage. So if you find yourself in a season where nothing feels especially inspired, where life is simply moving along, I hope you'll hear this as encouragement, not correction. You don't need to create meaning where there already is some. You don't need to intensify what's meant to be gentle. You don't need to hurry what's meant to be formed slowly. Stay with what's already supporting you. Honor the rhythms that keep you grounded. Trust that faithfulness practiced quietly still counts, because the ordinary is not the absence of growth. It's the environment where it matures. If this season feels ordinary, let that be okay. You don't need to make it meaningful. It already is. The small choices you're making, the rhythms you're returning to, the ways you're learning to stay present, they matter more than you realize. Growth doesn't always announce itself, but it is happening when you choose consistency over intensity and care over pressure. Let this week be about staying grounded, staying attentive, staying faithful in the quiet places. Before we close, I'll share this gently. In the weeks ahead, I'll be opening a small space for those who want to explore faith and wellness more intentionally through a Bible study. There's no pressure or expectation, just an invitation to walk slowly and thoughtfully together. I'll share more when the time feels right. Until next time, friends, stay nourished, stay cozy, and choose wellness one gentle pause at a time.